All right, I think we're going to proceed to our next presenter, who's Liane Schneller. Liane is a research scientist at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center in Buffalo, New York. She received an MS in Natural Sciences and a PhD in Cancer Sciences through the Roswell Park Graduate Division at the University of Buffalo, the State University of New York, SUNY. Her graduate research focused on the engineering of cigarettes, including cigarette filter ventilation and the delivery methods of menthol in cigarettes. Dr. Schneller was a TL-1 Post-Doctoral Representative and has received an NIH Loan Repayment Plan for clinical research. Congratulations on that. Dr. Schneller is part of the study team for the Western New York-based Center for Research on Flavored Tobacco Products, or CRoFT. Her research interests include policy impact analysis, product design influence and use behavior, and youth and young adult nicotine and tobacco use behaviors. All right, I'll throw it to you, Dr. Schneller.
Thank you so much. So as he said, I am a research scientist at Roswell Park, and today I will be covering the impact of flavors in tobacco products on initiation, cessation, switching, as well as health effects. And so there's going to be some overlap with Dr. Volanti's talk, and there is a lot to cover. So I just bear with me as I try to cover everything in a timely manner. It's not advancing. There we go. So first, I wanted to acknowledge the funding that covered the various studies that I will be presenting today, and I have no conflicts of interest to declare. So just to reiterate, tobacco products are appealing to all ages, but they are primarily used by youth and young adults who actually cite flavors as a reason for using tobacco. And flavored products are often used when consumers are first trying tobacco. They are physically appealing in that they elicit a physical sensation in the mouth and throat and mask the bitterness of the nicotine. And they are also branded with bright colors and interesting names to catch the consumer's eye. And all of these influence the harm perception of the tobacco product themselves. So as a result of this great appeal, and as Dr. Volanti had mentioned, there was a ban on all characterizing flavors other than menthol in cigarettes with the signing of the Tobacco Control Act. And as part of it, they put together the Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee to evaluate the impact of menthol cigarettes use on public health. And so I'll discuss this further in a minute, as a lot of the findings are very similar across all flavored tobacco products. But as a result of people switching from flavored cigarettes to other flavored products, we begin to see a lot more bans on other products. So some states and localities have restrictions on flavors, some more comprehensive than others. But then they also prioritize the enforcement of the deeming rule to restrict the manufacturing, distribution, and sale of flavored cartridge-based ends, except for tobacco and menthol. And these products are similar to Juul, and these cartridge-based products were particularly prevalent around this time, and they became a public health concern, especially with EVALI and COVID cases. So there was a lot of changing between that to other products following the ban of the cartridge base, such as more disposable ends products, as opposed to the cartridge-based products. So we saw a lot of substitution and changes in behavior with these products. And so just kind of bouncing back to the TIPSAC menthol report, they performed a comprehensive assessment of the impact of smoking menthol cigarettes on public health. And they found that menthol cigarettes do not appear to differ in toxicity compared to non-menthol cigarettes, that they increase the likelihood of initiating cigarette use since it masks the harshness and bitterness of the nicotine. And they result in greater addiction by allowing consumers to dose themselves with a greater amount of nicotine. And those who smoked menthol cigarettes have a reduced success rate of quitting. And finally, as I mentioned before, it does increase the appeal of the product. So it was concluded that menthol cigarettes do pose a risk to the public health above that seen in non-menthol cigarettes. But as I said, they removed the flavor products, kept menthol on the market, and then we saw a transition to, as I said, the ends cartridge-based products such as Juul, and now we're seeing more disposable-based products. And so there were decreases in use, but there were still ways to get around this ban in some cases, especially among the local and state restrictions. And we did see some switching of flavors, just from like a fruit flavor to menthol staying with the product or within the same product. But for the most part, people are still going to seek that flavor of interest. So the first main study I wanted to look at was assessing the potential substitution patterns among poly tobacco users. So I conducted analysis using adult data from the PATH study Wave 3 to assess cross-sectional inconsistencies in flavor category preference among poly tobacco users of different types of flavored tobacco products. So cigarettes were excluded from this analysis since they are not marketed in flavors other than menthol. And we also have to keep in mind that these analyses are limited by the interpretation of the respondents of that flavor category. So if they're vaping a, strawberry cheesecake, they could be marking a fruit flavor, or they could be marking a dessert, or they could be marking both options. So we can't really know exactly what flavor they're using. It's just based on their discretion when responding to the question. So among all users of non-cigarette tobacco products, which was a little over 9,000, we found that most users of flavored tobacco products only used one flavor category per product, meaning they only marked one of either it be fruit, clove, spice, or a dessert product. They only marked one category of the comprehensive list that they were provided. Fruit and tobacco flavors were among the most used flavor categories of ends, hookah, traditional cigars, and cigarillo or filtered cigars, while menthol or minty flavors were among the most common flavors for snus and smokeless users. So to get into the more interesting aspect of this paper, when we looked at users of multiple products, we were looking to see what flavor categories they used for each and if they were the same or different, meaning if ends were removed from the market and they were vaping a fruit flavor, would they likely change to another fruit flavored product, or would we see them switching between flavors based on the product that they are using? So there were 3,183 poly users that we assessed. And so this, the prevalence that you see here in the table are the inconsistencies between the two products. So we found that poly users of ends and traditional cigars had the largest inconsistency, where about 68% of users use different flavors across the product, meaning they might be using a fruit flavored ends, but switching to a mint or menthol traditional cigar if they were going back and forth. Conversely, poly users of traditional cigars and cigarillos or filtered cigars had the lowest inconsistency, with about 25% to 28% using different flavors, meaning when they were picking up a traditional cigar and switching to a filtered cigar, they were more likely to use a flavor that fell within the same flavor category. So it seems like flavor preferences did differ according to products, suggesting that consumers are probably not likely to switch between products and seek out that same flavor category. And now switching to looking at ends users and discontinuation of cigarette smoking. We conducted two studies at Roswell under CRoFT to assess the ends flavor use among smokers and how that influenced their successful quitting. So the top table uses ITC data from the US, Canada, England, and Australia between 2016 and 2018. And the bottom table uses data from the PAST study between 2014 and 2017. And in both studies, it was found that the dual users who used fruit or sweet flavor ends were more likely to discontinue smoking than those who used tobacco flavor. However, in the PAST study, after there was adjustment for various demographic factors, nicotine dependence, and behavior factors, cigarette use, and the wave that they were participating in, these findings were rendered insignificant. And then when it came to the menthol or mint end users, there were no significant association to report. And continuing with that same PAST study, they assessed the ENDS flavor use and discontinuation of smoking by cigarette flavor use. And it was found that menthol smokers who used tobacco flavor ends had significantly lower rates of discontinuing smoking than those who used a fruit or sweet flavored ends. And then when looking at those who smoked just a regular tobacco cigarette, there were no associations based on the flavored ends that they used and discontinuing of smoking. And I think finally, the most interesting study that we have is the cohort study conducted by Dr. Maciej Ganowitz and colleagues as a part of our Western New York CRoFT. And participants included daily exclusive ENDS users. And the study required participants to come to 12 monthly visits where information on flavor use was collected, as well as biological samples, and various respiratory tests were conducted. We did have a 60% completion rate, and 71% were former smokers. So they were not currently using cigarettes, but they were former smokers. So among those who did quit smoking after initiating, so those former smokers, 71% initiated with a fruit-flavored ends, while only 20% initiated with tobacco-flavored ends. And then looking at during the study period, 73% reported currently using a flavored product, 26% reported using a menthol ends, and 14% reported using tobacco ends. So the most common pattern of switching was between fruit and menthol flavored ends, while there was little switching between tobacco to fruit flavored ends or from fruit to tobacco flavored ends. To assess the biomarkers of exposure, we collected urine samples and quantified various carbonyl compounds. And this is the left figure here. And we can see there were significant higher levels of carbonyl compounds among tobacco-flavored ENDS users versus fruit-flavored ENDS users. And then on the right, we have various inflammatory markers that were quantified in plasma as biomarkers of potential harm. And they found significantly higher levels of inflammatory marker IL-6 in users of tobacco-flavored ENDS compared to levels measured in fruit-flavored ENDS users. And conversely, concentrations of IL-1 in plasma from tobacco-flavored ENDS users were higher than in plasma from non-tobacco-flavored ENDS users. And finally, the respiratory tests that were conducted included forced vital capacity tests, forced expiratory volume in 1 second tests. There were various respiratory muscle strength tests and fractional exhaled nitric oxide tests. And there were no differences in respiratory test results between users of fruit and tobacco flavored ENDS. However, when participants were asked to report on chest trouble, the number of times that they had chest trouble in an average week over the past 3 months, we did see that users of fruit-flavored ENDS self-reported more chest trouble than users of tobacco-flavored ENDS. So in conclusion, to kind of wrap everything up and all the data that I just presented, the use of Ns with different flavors was shown to be associated with differences in behavioral transitions, exposure to respiratory toxicants, levels of inflammatory mediators, as well as the respiratory health indicators. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions at the end. And thank you again for having me today.